Hi, everyone. I am glad to officially be able to kick off today's event, Developing Nonprofit Leaders through Pro Bono. Really, really excited to have this great group of folks on the line. It was cool to see the huge variety of nonprofit missions that were interested in this event, and we're really glad to be able to invest the time and make this discussion happen today. So appreciate you being a part of this. So I'll start with some introductions because you all have been so generous to get intros rolling in that chat box. And while I introduce myself, please continue introducing your own organization, where you're based, and maybe your main interest in wanting to join this event. So my name is Kimberly Swartz. You can call me Kim. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am Taproot Senior Director of Community Engagement. But if you've been with Taproot for a while, so have I. I've been here for over 7 years, and so I've had many different roles within our nonprofit. So if you've been a part of our community for a while, you may have known me in one of those other roles. So definitely let me know if you fall into that camp in the chat. So really, what does Senior Director of Community Engagement mean? It means I think a lot about the design of the experiences that bring nonprofits and volunteers together to create impact and collective joy. And so really grateful to be able to have the opportunity to create experiences like this one, where we get to create some mutual educational resources and community building time. And one quick logistic note here, you'll see my LinkedIn is hyperlinked on the slide. I know you can't click the screen right now, but we will send out a recording of this webinar as well as the deck to the webinar following the event. So we usually try for later this afternoon, but tomorrow morning will be the latest that you'll get our follow-up note. So if you registered for this event, you'll receive a recording and this slide deck, which has my contact information in it. All right, so now you know who I am, but who is Taproot? I know some of you indicated in the registration for this event that you were wanting to learn more about our nonprofit, so I figured I would start there. So Taproot is a nonprofit organization, and we really exist to support our fellow nonprofits. We were founded as a nonprofit back in 2001, really with this knowledge that there's a massive resource gap present in the social sector. And I know that's nothing that's news to all of you on the call. We're very aware that organizations who may very well have the solutions to our world's most pressing social challenges simply don't have the financial means or the staff capacity to carry out those missions to their fullest extent. And so Taproot is out to democratize access to resources for nonprofits, regardless of their mission area, their budget size, or the years that they've been in operations, factors that ultimately and unfortunately often lead to certain nonprofits being left out of funding or sponsorship opportunities for other resources. So how do we get you those resources? We seek to empower and enable mission-driven organizations by connecting them with skilled volunteers from fields like operations and analytics, marketing, HR, technology, business strategy, finance, etc. So some quick stats about the program. We, like I mentioned, have been around for over 20 years now, and are really grateful to have had the opportunity to partner with over 10,000 social change organizations and tens of thousands of volunteers from across professional fields, totaling over 300 million in donated professional services. And one of the main ways that we do this is through Taproot Plus, which is our free-to-use volunteer and nonprofit matchmaking platform, which I know many of you probably already have accounts on, and that's how you heard about today's event, which is great. In addition to our community-led programming through Taproot Plus, our nonprofit also has partnered with over 100 Fortune 500 companies through our advisory services practice, which brings talented corporate employee talent directly to nonprofits across Taproot's network. Through the Taproot Plus platform, we're really trying to lower barriers to entry for organizations who are just starting out or looking to grow. And this was asked by several folks when they registered for this event, just a general question around program eligibility, and if startups or early stage or volunteer-led or run organizations were able to participate. And so I just wanted to answer that straight up front. And the answer is yes. In fact, Taproot really specializes in our work with early stage nonprofits, and our staff is really knowledgeable about your unique needs. So if you are volunteer run, or maybe you're a team of one, please don't worry. You are 100% able to tap into our resources, able and encouraged to. And we'll talk, obviously, more about the staff development and leadership development resources specifically throughout this event. So during this event, I am going to be sharing recommendations on how you can tap into professional development resources at your nonprofit by utilizing corporate strengths from across the Taproot Volunteer Network. So I'm going to share some tactical examples of what that could look like through consultation sessions, brainstorming and immediate troubleshooting, and also through in-depth pro bono projects that you can complete with a volunteer partner. Because I want you all to be able to walk away from this event with really tangible takeaways of, okay, I can go and request this type of support online right now and invest in our human resources capacity or invest in our leadership development abilities. And so that is going to be kind of the first chunk of the content that we cover. I also want to spend time today talking about the professional development benefits that come from the act of managing a pro bono project as a rising nonprofit professional or as a rising nonprofit leader. And so we'll kind of do a two-parter. I'll zoom through some examples. Again, you'll receive the deck after the fact. So even if I don't cover all of the information on, or all of the copy that's on a certain slide, you will receive the slide deck. And so you'll receive kind of a deck full of project and session examples that you can immediately take to Taproot's programs and use your account to request those services. And then we'll talk about some of the benefits and how you can build up leaders at your organization through the act of planning for and managing volunteers during a pro bono partnership. All right, so we've got a lot of content to get through. And because I'm going to be sharing examples of pro bono as we go, I want to make sure that you all are able to immediately take action. I think those are the best types of webinars and events, is when you can just immediately get going on the information that you've received, and you make the most of that time, right? I know we're all very, very busy people. So as I'm presenting ideas, as I'm coming at you with some HR staff development suggestions, please feel free to go open up another tab, go into your Taproot account, and immediately start requesting these resources. Because if you have any questions as you're requesting them, or if you run into any issues navigating the platform, you've got me on the line, you've got Taproot staff members on the line. And so as questions come up, pop them in the chat and we can address them during the Q&A time, or even as I go. So you are welcome and encouraged. Go to Taproot Plus, create your free account. We're currently accessible to charitable organizations, fiscally sponsored organizations, as well as public service institutions. So if you're a public library, a public school, etc., you're also eligible for support through Taproot Plus. And we're open in the US, the UK, the EU, India, and Canada. And like I said, there really is no fee, no price tag associated with this. We're a nonprofit that is here to serve our fellow nonprofits. All right. So with all of those logistics notes aside, I want to dig into the heart of today's webinar. which is getting you access to volunteer support to fuel staff development. Because we know that your people make your work possible, right? And we know that when people feel like they can bring their full selves to work, when they feel like they're valued for their contributions, when they feel that they're being appropriately compensated, and they feel like they have room to grow within an organization, we know that they're more likely to remain with that organization. And so my question to all of you to consider as we chat today is, how are you keeping staff engaged with your mission? How are you keeping staff connected with one another? And how are you actively expanding the skill sets of staff members? And if you're a team of one, or maybe a very small team, and you're attending today's event to get ideas about staff development specifically for yourself, that's completely okay. I want you to pose that question to yourself. Do you feel completely engaged with your mission? Do you feel connected with your board or your volunteers that you work with on a regular basis? And do you feel like you have the time and space and the ability to actively invest in the expansion of your professional skill sets? So whether you're a team of one, a team of 10, or a team of 100, same question applies. Okay. So I want to share some stats from across the field because I think that'll help set the stage for some of the pro bono recommendations, some of the volunteer project recommendations that I'm going to share. Because we need to talk about the problem statement before we propose some solutions for it, right? So we know that the past few years have been tough ones when it comes to employee retention, when it comes to hiring, and when it comes to growth opportunities as well. All of our budgets dollars have had to go towards meeting expanding community needs, and it can feel really difficult to continue putting that budget towards staff or back office expenses. Nonprofit HR did a really extensive survey back in 2021 around nonprofit talent retention practices and policies. And they found that not only were 42% of nonprofit leaders at that time expecting employee turnover rates to increase in the coming years, but 80% of nonprofit leaders responded that their organizations did not have a talent retention strategy in place. And I know from my work at Taproot, constantly consulting with or in touch with our nonprofit community members, that this stat definitely rings true for many of our community members. So if you're in that grouping, please don't feel like you're alone. Again, it can be really difficult to invest the time and resources and prioritization to build out a true staff retention strategy. We also know from our really great friends at the National Council of Nonprofits, they released a great resource a few months ago called the 2023 Nonprofit Workforce Survey, which I recommend digging into. They found that 3 out of 4 nonprofits surveyed reported job vacancies. So I spoke earlier about the past few years being a really difficult hiring market. This still is ringing true for us over the past several months. And nearly half of the nonprofits that the National Council of Nonprofits surveyed reported greater workforce shortages than even before the COVID-19 pandemic outset. And 3 out of 10 nonprofits reported that these workforce shortages have directly resulted in longer wait times for their services. So the lack of being able to invest in ourselves leads to the lack of us being able to invest and serve in our communities. So in Taproot's work with our nonprofit community members, because as I mentioned before, we work with folks across issue areas, across budget sizes. So we're talking about a fairly diverse group of organizations and organizations types. And we've studied that this lack of investment in staff development typically stems from the following factors. And I've made really general buckets up on the slide that you see here. So resources, time, prioritization, as well as expertise. So when I'm talking about lack of resources, I'm thinking about nonprofits often don't have access or don't feel like they have access to educational or mentorship opportunities or tools to either provide to themselves or to provide proactively to staff members. When we're thinking about lack of time, there's a feeling across the sector, and I'm sure this is going to ring true for many of us on the line, because I know I grapple with this myself as a lifelong nonprofit professional. There's a feeling that all time, every minute in our workday, and often many of the minutes in our personal lives as well, every minute needs to be put towards programmatic work or the management, the day-to-day upkeep of the organization. Because if I'm not taking care of that additional item on the to-do list, no one's taking care of it. And so community members suffer, right? So there's this feeling of guilt if you take an hour of your day to focus on yourself or focus on team building as opposed to focusing on the community. And that's a unique burden to the nonprofit space. I also want to talk about lack of prioritization, because I feel like the lack of feeling you have the time ability to do this really ties into this feeling of competing priorities as well. Very interrelated. Staff development and HR are considered back office expenses and activities. And because of the presiding funding structures and what we're told is acceptable and not acceptable by traditional funding institutions or sponsoring institutions, it can feel really difficult to invest budget or time on staff development or HR work as opposed to programmatic work. And so this leads to increasing challenges to prioritize, invest time, energy, and space around building out employee engagement, retention, and development plans. And then, of course, there's this big bucket of challenges that we hear often from our nonprofit partners, that there's a lack of expertise in-house, right? If you don't have a dedicated HR staff member, or maybe even a board member who's focused on staff development, staff engagement, or retention, it can be difficult just to figure out, okay, well, who do I talk to about this stuff? Who can I ask for an informed opinion from when it comes to, hey, this person in our organization could be a rising leader, but I'm nervous that they're getting antsy due to lack of compensation or lack of leadership opportunities. What should we do? How should we navigate this? How can we keep them engaged and satisfied within their role, because we see a lot of opportunities for them within our organization, right? Because we know it's more expensive to have to fill a vacant role than it is to retain rising staff members and rising leaders. It's really expensive the higher up you get in terms of positions in the organizations. So it's much more expensive to rehire for fill vacancies, especially in executive positions or junior management positions. And so that's definitely something you need to keep in mind when considering pros and cons of investments, whether that's financial or time investments in staff development, professional development arenas. All right, so we've talked about the challenges, we talked about the downers. Let's talk about some potential solutions and how corporate volunteer skill sets could be applied to help alleviate or even solve some of these common staff development and leadership development challenges. And I want to start with a session example. So if you're familiar with Taproot programs, you know that through your Taproot Plus account, you have the option of requesting either a multi-week project, which is a in-depth partnership, usually with one volunteer, where you work on something for a series of weeks. Typically, we find that projects take anywhere from 2 to 10 weeks to complete, with the volunteer donating around 2 to 5 hours of their time each week. And projects always have a really specific end deliverable in mind. So you're not just bringing someone in and saying, hey, I need someone to handle my HR stuff for a full month. That's not what a project is. That's what we would consider a position or a role. A project is going to be something like, I need to create an HR handbook because my organization doesn't have one. Or looking outside of the HR lens, I know many of you said you were interested in marketing support as well. So I'll throw an example out in that area. Marketing projects could look like, I need to create a brochure advertising my programs, or I need to create a social media strategy for an upcoming fundraising campaign that I'm doing. So the theme with projects is they have a really discrete end goal or deliverable in mind. So those are Taproot projects. Taproot sessions are going to be other on-demand volunteer option that you have available to you. Sessions are 1 hour consultation calls with an expert in a specific functional area. So this is a great option for nonprofits who want to brainstorm, who want to talk about a sticky situation with a completely unbiased or third-party perspective, who want to do a screen share to get like immediate problem solving or troubleshooting. Or great option if you have a really big challenge or dilemma in front of you and have no idea how to narrow that into a pro bono project with a discrete end deliverable or end goal, right? So you can use sessions to prepare for larger projects as well. So I'm going to cover session examples and project examples, but I wanted to make sure I explained the difference first. And definitely let me know if you have any questions about those program breakdowns as we go. Like I said, I'm trying to keep my eyes on the chat box as best as I can. So first example I want to cover, using a consultation session to talk with an HR expert or someone who has a lot of experience with operations, operational management as well, could be really helpful to prepare for bringing an employee in the first place. This is something that often earlier stage organizations can struggle with, not having a baked in procedure that welcomes new employees or even new volunteers or board members. You can consider those other groups in this as well, to make sure they receive all of the information they need and in the right order, and make sure that they build the necessary connections across the organization, across the board, or with other volunteers. And it's an HR challenge that often gets overlooked, but it's really critical to make sure if you just made the investment of hiring an employee, you want to make sure that you make the most of that investment. So a proper onboarding experience, making sure you have a 90-day of like 30, 60, 90-day goals and review process set up, making sure you have these basic components of onboarding baked in is really important, that you get their experience started on a great foot. That way they feel really prepared, motivated, and inspired to jump into their work and prepared to be really effective workers. Because if you can get them off on the right foot, odds are you're going to be able to retain them for longer. And so that you won't have to repeat the expensive hiring process again in the near-term future. Keep in mind, new team members are often taking in a lot of information at once, getting used to new roles and responsibilities. So what seems obvious to you might be brand new to them. So think about, what do they need to learn first? What would help them learn it? Sometimes if you've been sitting in an organization for a while, you carry a little bit of bias about what's common knowledge or not. And so this is why this is an area really great for an external volunteer, someone who doesn't have any of that bias, to come in and provide you with recommendations. All right, so first session recommendation, and again, we're going to share out these slides so you'll have a copy of all of these ideas that you can take to your Taproot account and start making requests. I want to dig into projects. I really, really stand behind this idea. If you don't have a performance management process established, this is one of those bedrock items that's really important just to ensure that you have the ability to retain and develop team members once you bring them on board. So performance management process, effectively, you would be working with a volunteer to create a system or a process for measuring, analyzing, and improving an employee's ability to help the organization fulfill its mission and serve stakeholders. So this process would help answer questions for team members around how they can better do their job over time. And it helps them answer that question of what's expected of me, what does success look like? If I can achieve these things, these objectives, then that's an indicator that I am ready for advancement within the organization. So it helps take some of the nebulousness out of a potential advancement or development process. So setting clear expectations for what they need to improve upon, what do they need to grow into in order to be successful at their current role, much less being successful in future leadership positions as well. So this is a really clear one, and a really great one for folks who haven't yet considered what their employee retention process looks like. Start here, because if you can build out the performance management process, you can start gathering data, you can start test driving it and seeing what additional pieces do you need to have in order to retain top talent. And I will say this is a pretty underutilized pro bono project. We have really great pool of staff development volunteers and HR management volunteers that are a bit underutilized compared to some of our other skill sets, because often nonprofits gravitate towards more of the pro bono assistance around marketing or anything that's like fundraising, sponsorship, business development related, which I completely understand why. But you got to invest in your staff in order to make all of that amazing work happen so that you can talk about it to the world and gain more support. So these things all feed into one another, and you need to make sure that you're giving them the equal weight that they deserve. The next pro bono project example I want to talk about is this is a really big one, and not many nonprofits know that this is even an option that they can tap into. So I want to dispel that myth. Please use pro bono leadership coaching. This is an excellent use of volunteer support. You can use leadership coaches on a pro bono basis to prepare yourself, prepare staff members, or even board members for managing effectively in difficult situations through dedicated leadership coaching. So we have certified leadership coaches who are skilled in areas such as change management, remote team oversight, building or maintaining a positive organizational culture, providing feedback. I know that's really difficult for certain rising leaders, and more topics as well. And so leadership coaching, dedicated support in this area can really help ensure that leaders or rising staff members within your organization are as prepared as possible to navigate potential crises or major shifts in program delivery, or just interpersonal challenges that they may be facing internally as well, by building up their empathy, their agility, and their decision-making skills. Generally, this type of pro bono project would look like connecting with a coach for a series of one-on-one dedicated coaching sessions over the period of 2 or so months, where the coach and the staff member or the board member would work together to define certain leadership development goals, talk through different scenarios, and offer recommendations on how to navigate similar situations or scenarios in the future, and usually comes with some exercises for the staff or board member to work on along the way. I will say again, this is an area where we have volunteers that are hungry to give back, and they are not tapped into enough. I hosted a live matchmaking event back in, it was during National Volunteer Week, and I had 3 leadership coaches on the line all saying, you need to post more opportunities in leadership coaching because I want to volunteer, and I feel like not enough nonprofits know that I'm out there. So please consider leadership coaching. This is a really, really powerful tool, whether it's for yourself or for a member on your team. All right, I want to make sure I give you at least one other session recommendation. And this is actually one that I've used myself, so I can personally vouch for it. And I've utilized leadership coaching as well on a pro bono basis, and so would personally vouch for that one as well. But another session idea. As a reminder, sessions are these 1-hour consultation calls that you can hold with volunteers. And definitely recommend this one. It's a great way to get some creative ideas flowing into your organization. Consider posting a topic around employee engagement brainstorming. So if you're not sure where to start, maybe you have never explored employee engagement or staff development opportunities at your organization before, or you don't have an HR background, that's okay. Chat with an HR professional or multiple professionals about creative employee engagement options that are feasible based on your budget and capacity constraints, because that's really important. They can give you a million great ideas, but if they don't align with your budget and the time and space you have available for the efforts, then they're effectively worthless. So make sure that the ideas work within the constraints that your organization and your team are operating within. And I'll share a tip here because I know we have some volunteer-led, volunteer-run organizations on the line. And so I want to call out, so I actually have utilized this session topic myself. So I went in with my Taproot account and requested pro bono in this area. And I met with multiple HR professionals, applied immediately, which was wonderful. And so I held multiple calls in this area to discuss engagement ideas. And the twist that I put on it was I asked these professionals to brainstorm how we could translate employee engagement tactics that they had used in the corporate space. And I asked them to help me figure out how do those employee engagement tactics translate into something I could use for volunteer engagement and retention tactics. Because at the time, I was working specifically with a volunteer community base, and I wanted to figure out how can I make sure that volunteers feel engaged and satisfied with their roles and feel committed to the organization and committed to staying here for the long term. And so I just want to say that because it's on the table for you. If you're a volunteer-run organization or you're someone who also works primarily with a pool of volunteers versus a team of staff members, consider translating employee engagement into volunteer engagement. And it's a great way to get that great skill fit with corporate professionals. And I'm seeing a great question from Nefertiti in the chat around, are there multiple projects allowed? Yes. So Taproot programs, you can submit multiple requests at once. You can work with multiple volunteers at one time. The one caveat that I'm going to put there is, and I've mentioned this throughout, Taproot services are free of cost, so there's no fee. However, pro bono takes time and energy to manage. So that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit more later on, because it's that pro bono management piece which is a great professional development opportunity in and of itself. And you want to make sure you have the time and space to effectively manage the volunteers that you're bringing in to help your organization. So that's the only caveat I would put on it, is only request what you can effectively manage at once. All right, so I'm going to zoom through. I have 2 more ideas, but again, we'll share out the deck. You can dig into all the details then. This is a pretty straightforward, cut and dry pro bono project. A compensation and benefits analysis. If it's been a while since your organization has conducted an analysis in this area, you're going to want to see how you stack up against other peers or competitors, or maybe similar sized organizations to yours. So you could work with a volunteer to conduct this analysis on your behalf. That has the added benefit of coming from a neutral third party, right? Because if you have someone in-house to conduct this type of sensitive analysis, sometimes a little bit of bias can creep in, right? You know, it's no one's fault, but we do all come with baggage and bias just because we've been with an organization for a while. And so this is a really great one to consider for a third-party volunteer. And then my last project recommendation is around, you could work with a volunteer to research leadership development resources, right? So if you don't have the time and space to dig into these areas yourself, but you know you want to provide staff members with opportunities, use a volunteer to actually create a database or a list of leadership development opportunities on your behalf, right? And so, you know, some of the things that come to mind right now, you know, I'm thinking about things like LinkedIn Learning, right? They have really extensive resources on a host of different topics, you know, functional skill areas, as well as project management and giving feedback. But there's a price tag attached to it, right? A volunteer who's conducting research for you on your behalf could dig into options like LinkedIn Learning and discover that LinkedIn Learning is often provided free through your local library, right? But you wouldn't know that unless you looked into it and really dug around for those options. So this is a really great way to get creative with how to use volunteer resources to provide additional resources to your staff or board members. And there's tons of other lists or things I could add to that list, along with LinkedIn Learning. You know, things like Nonprofit Ready. They're a really great partner of Taproot's as well, and have tons of free resources and trainings. Would highly recommend. Yes, Angela, look into your local library. I'm based in Charlotte, and shout out to the Charlotte Public Library System, but they provide it for free using your library card. And I know many other library systems do that. So I can't guarantee it for your area, but it's at least an option to look into. So definitely explore it. And volunteers can help you explore options such as that example. Okay, so I started touching on this before, but I want to make sure I have some time to dig into it further, which is, there are true professional benefits that come from managing pro bono partnerships. So this is a really creative way to provide project management and people leadership opportunities, especially at small organizations that may not have many people management opportunities available. And I'm sure we've all been at places where maybe we've been hungry for more opportunities, and we've asked for additional responsibilities and been told, ooh, unfortunately, that's so-and-so's job, and we don't want to blur the lines, right? We don't want to go into their lane. And pro bono management can be a really great way to not only bring more resources into your organization, but also provide rising staff members with these management opportunities that they might not usually have. So if you're in a position where maybe none of those HR or staff development projects that I went through earlier, maybe none of those apply to you, or you feel like now's not the right time, but You were really excited when I mentioned those social media ideas earlier, or you're really excited by the idea that, oh, Taproot has finance and accounting volunteers available. Let's do that. One way you could still build staff development into pro bono is consider having one of your team members, one of the lower ranking members of your organization, or someone you've identified is a high performer but has never had any people management or people leadership experience, have them be responsible for managing the pro bono partnership, because this helps develop their skills in a few areas. And I've listed some general buckets on the slide here. And I want to start with project planning, because a big part of pro bono project management is you have to scope out the project. You have to design what the project is going to look like and identify what is that end deliverable going to look like. What is the success criteria, so that myself and the volunteer know, okay, our work here is complete and we both feel great about it. And that is actually a really challenging thing to do that not many younger in their career staff members ever have the opportunity to do if they're constantly being delegated delegated tasks instead of leading projects themselves. So the act of having to lead project planning is a really powerful development device and opportunity in and of itself. Additionally, when someone is managing a pro bono engagement, there's a level of internal buy-in that has to be generated before the pro bono project should kick off, right? So if you've ever attended a Taproot training in the past, you've definitely heard one of our team members talk about staff and board readiness as one of our, I think we call it the 4 tests for great pro bono. And staff and board readiness is one of them. And so the rule is kind of, you need to make sure that all relevant decision makers are on board with the support you're trying to bring in and with how you're going to implement the support, right? Because you don't want to create a fundraising strategy. You don't want to create like a crowdfunding campaign for your social media and then at the end of the project discover that your marketing director does not want to do individual giving, right? Because then the volunteer's work sits on a shelf, never gets used, and you've wasted time managing the volunteer on that. So the act of gaining internal buy-in can be a really helpful exercise for rising staff members in building advocacy abilities, really advocating, fighting for their ideas, their beliefs on opportunities for the organization, and a really good experience with seeking feedback from different levels of the organization as well. The other bucket that I would name, and this is a really big one, is general skill development. So when you're managing a pro bono project, you are going to have to interview volunteer candidates. So if someone has never had to participate in an interview process before, like participate on our side of the desk of an interview process where we're the ones hiring, this is a really great experience for them to get time reviewing resumes, reviewing portfolios, reviewing statements of interest / cover letters, asking the right questions during an interview to gauge best fit. So there's some skill development just in being a hiring manager, which can be really important for people management or leadership growth. It also comes with like hard professional skill development. So if you have a staff member who is managing a volunteer who's doing an HR project or a finance or a tech project that they have zero experience in, they're going to learn so much from that volunteer just in the act of collaborating with them to the endpoint of the project. So there's some exposure and just some experiential learning that comes as well. And then, of course, they are managing effectively a team member for a period of 2 to 10 weeks during the course of the pro bono project. So they are gaining people leadership experience that they can add to their resume. And then finally, It's a good chance to help your employees build their social capital. They get to expand their network. They get to meet new people, get experience with cross-cultural communications, communicating with someone who doesn't sit on their direct team, that works in a different field, maybe works in a different city than them. And so it's a really great way to get them more comfortable with being more external facing and network building. So, and I can say I have personally benefited from this as well. I led some pro bono projects on behalf of Taproot back in my first couple of years with the organization. As I mentioned earlier, I've been here for over 7 years now. But back in year 1 and year 2, when we were a smaller organization, there were no people leadership responsibilities available for me, right? There were no project management responsibilities available for me or project leadership. And I was really hungry for opportunities, more responsibilities to add to my plate because I saw opportunities for Taproot, right? And I saw opportunities for myself. And so I was able to design some pro bono project scopes, put those scopes out on Taproot, connect with relevant professionals, and then manage them on these projects. And can definitely confidently say that those things absolutely bolstered my professional resume and bolstered the contributions that I made to Taproot and definitely led to me being able to stay here for 7 years and advance within the organization. So personally, really recommend this approach. And then I won't touch on it now just because we're running a little low on time, but I made sure to just include some tips because I mentioned tips for great pro bono earlier, and I wanted to leave you guys with some of those. So you'll have access to these in the deck afterwards. But for now, I want to make sure that we have some time to dig into any questions that people might have. So I'm just going to take a moment to scroll through the chat. And please, if there's anything on your mind, questions, comments, feedback, drop it in the chat box now because we have plenty of time to dig into it. So I see the question around multiple projects allowed, and I think we did respond to that. But there's a second question at the other end of that I did not answer specifically. So should you complete one project before beginning another? That is a really interesting one because there are some projects that you really should start with before you request another because the scope of the deliverable is going to be informed by the first thing. So just as an example, if you have not conducted a compensation and benefits analysis recently, this would be an example of maybe you should start here and then begin work on your performance management process because your performance management process should be informed also by data on the types of packages and bonuses and like resources available you have to retain and develop rising staff members and how you want to utilize those resources. So hopefully that makes sense. There are some things that need to be informed by the other, but as a general rule of thumb, you can have overlapping pro bono projects. So hopefully that answers your question, Nefertiti. All right. So I'm seeing a question. What are the main reasons for Taproot consultants to leave a project? It's a really good question. And, something to keep in mind when we're talking about pro bono resources in general are that these are volunteer resources. And so there's no contractual obligation in the same way that there would be a paid consultant, right? And so that's always a risk of pro bono a consultant will work with you for a couple of weeks and then have to withdraw for whatever reason or another. And Taproot is always there to help you match with a different volunteer to help you finish the work. So if that ever happens to you, please just immediately get in touch with our team and we can do some curated matchmaking to get you connected with an alternative resource. So that's the first thing I would say. But to answer your question more specifically, Some reasons that I have heard and experienced of volunteers needing to step away. They're humans and human things happen in their life. We are in the midst of year 4 or 5 of an ongoing pandemic that definitely has shaken people's abilities to have a stable schedule, whether that comes to childcare, just managing their professional load, managing our household, etc. So COVID-19 pandemic, I would say definitely has been a big reason that we've heard over the past few months. Also, volunteers are vetting nonprofits at the same time nonprofits are vetting them. So keep in mind that if a volunteer finds out partway through a project or comes to the realization that, you know, what they originally asked me for, I feel that I can't deliver because these materials aren't available, or I feel like they actually need this other thing instead, that is a semi-frequent item that we'll hear from projects that end partway through is, well, the volunteer was actually a great partner, but they informed us that we actually need to go and do this other thing first. So sometimes it's a more of a redirect versus an end of the engagement, if that makes sense. All right, I'm catching up on some of the other questions. Yes, we are recording this webinar and we'll share that with all registrants, Jessica. Angela, I'm seeing your question around, should each member of my staff have a Taproot account? Yes. So I recommend that each staff or board member who wants to utilize Pro Bono, they should each have their own Taproot account. It's all going to be attached to your organization. So upon sign up, they'll need to provide, if you're a US-based organization, they should provide your EIN, which allows us to verify that you're from a charitable organization and link you with the relevant organization. But the reason everyone needs to have their own account is because they need to be the main point of contact on whatever pro bono project or session they request, so that they can respond to volunteer applicants as they come in, and they can work effectively with whatever volunteer they're matched with. So please create individual accounts. All right. Yes, please follow up with me with any questions. Thank you for asking that, Tia. I have the Taproot Plus Help Desk email is up on the screen right now, and you'll receive a follow-up email from our team either later today or tomorrow. And so you'll have contact details. Just respond to that email and you'll reach us. The help desk goes directly to the entire Taproot Plus team. So I lead up the Taproot Plus team, and I have staff members who are much smarter than me when it comes to certain matters. And so maybe even able to get back to you faster, depending on what your question is. But that help desk is sent to every Taproot Plus team member. So that truly is the quickest way to get in touch with Taproot. So definitely save that email. And if you get an email from help@taprootplus.org, it is an actual human. It's not just a bot account. Okay. I see a question around you're looking for a speaker for a group of college students on specific topics, building your brand, community advocacy. I love that. I would recommend a project, because some of that's going to be curriculum building. And so that's a little more in depth than a 60-minute consultation session. So I recommend posting a project, saying that you want someone to build out their curriculum or use curriculum maybe they've already done in their own job or role, and apply that to meet the needs of your specific college student segment. Okay, should we complete an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement with volunteers, or does Taproot have this set up? Great question. So, excuse me, we have standard terms of service that all nonprofits, all program participants agree to if they create a Taproot account. And that is effectively like a limited liability insurance, so providing coverage to you and the volunteer. So that's one thing that's just in place, standard across the board for users. We provide through your dashboard, once you're matched with a volunteer on an engagement, we provide a templated NDA in case you want to use it. But ultimately, we don't force a nonprofit to use any of those materials. It's up to you and your comfort level at your organization with what you want to have the volunteer sign or agree to. So typically, my advice for you is if you use a standard volunteer agreement or standard NDA for any volunteers or staff members or consultants or contractors at your organization, I would use the same thing for any volunteer that you connect with through Taproot. And you can tell the volunteer that in the interview process for a project and say like, hey, this is something that's standard for any of our volunteer connections. We need you to sign this volunteer agreement, or we need you to virtually sign this NDA before we begin work together. Is that something you would be amenable to? And if the answer is no, then that's the chance you have right at the beginning to find a different volunteer. But usually the answer is going to be yes. I've actually never heard of an instance where an NDA or a volunteer agreement has been proposed and a volunteer has balked at that. I think that's pretty standard operating procedure for folks who volunteer, whether in person or virtually at this point. I know we're right at time, so I can hang out for 2 more minutes and then I have to jump to another presentation. But just wanted to take this moment in case other people also have to jump to say thank you so much for joining. Definitely stay in touch if you have any other questions that come up along the way. And I'm hoping this gives you tons of ideas to immediately take to your Taproot account and get requesting. And I hope to see some of your team members on Taproot as well, because like I said, I'm a huge personal advocate for just pro bono as such a special tool and a powerful tool for building up those who are a little earlier in their career. And I've just seen so many benefits from pro bono project management for those folks. So I think I'll answer one more question and then have to close this out. I see some questions around what would the role description in improving a website. We would probably advise that you do a website audit first if you don't have that in place already. An audit would be where someone who has user experience or user interface design experience comes in, does a full audit of your website's infrastructure and what it looks like externally, and makes a list of recommendations for improvements or optimization. So I recommend you start there. And then you would need to work with either a designer if there were recommendations around improving the external look and feel of your site. You would work with a designer on design updates, or if there were just some feature fixes or some bugs that needed to be fixed, you'd be looking for a web developer. But we actually have a great webinar recording on that topic. So if you're on the Taproot site and just type in website, you should find a great webinar done by one of my team members on walking through the full website design and development process. So highly recommend. All right, folks. Unfortunately, I have to go ahead and close us out, but thank you so much. These were such wonderful questions. Thanks for being such an engaged group, and really looking forward to hopefully chatting with you all online through email and through Taproot Plus. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.